Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Pros Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Dan Harris. You can find me on Twitter at DanHarris80. It is time to talk about some undervalued early to mid-round pitchers. And when you are talking pitching, there is nobody that you want to have on your podcast more than Nick Pollack from Pitcher List. He's on Twitter at Pitcher List. Nick, this is so great for us to finally get a chance to talk. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, man, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, Dan, we get to hang out finally.
I've been
waiting for this.
The best. Now, we were
long.
actually, Nick, we were actually in the same TGFBI league last year.
No,
and
I'm
this
so
is something,
sorry.
No, you don't have to apologize. There are plenty of things you can apologize for, but that's not one of them. But I want to say that I feel like this is the perfect episode for you because I remember while we were doing the draft, now I was on vacation during that draft, like the last time people were allowed to leave their house. So I was drafting from like a beach, but I remember your philosophy generally is waiting, right? You're not a guy who goes early on pitching, right? Yep. You like their early to mid round sort of targets, and that's what you did in that draft. So this is right up your alley, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it changes every year, of course. I think this time last year when we thought it would be a lovely, pristine 2020 ahead of us, I had that philosophy of considering getting your first start around the 6th, 7th round. It has changed a little bit because there is even more uncertainty this year, I feel, because we just don't know how teams are going to treat volume, and how to pull from a 2020 sample is ridiculously hard. So I am pulling back a little from that strategy, but it's still, I think it's a good assessment that in general, I'm more on the side of waiting longer than the consensus.
Yeah, well, good. Well, we'll talk about a couple of guys today that you are maybe looking to get a little head of the consensus. And what we're going to be using here is we have average draft position on our site, FantasyPros.com, pulls the average draft position from a bunch of different sites. We're going to try to stick, generally speaking, to pitchers who are being drafted before pick 200. I will allow for us to bleed over that if necessary, because we were talking, there are some guys that we like that bleed over that a little bit. But for the most part, guys who you're not waiting till the very last rounds to take, guys who you're taking as people who you think will be an actual starter for you in your fantasy rotation. Then we're going to finish up at the end with a couple of mailbag questions. Some people want to have some questions when they hear Nick's coming on. They want to know about pitchers. But before we get into it, yes, it's true.
It's like
awesome. It's almost like you know pitching and people know that and they want to hear you talk about pitching. It's crazy.
Man, that's a ridiculous thought.
It's crazy.
That's a ridiculous thought.
Before we get into it, though, let me remind everybody that our 2021 MLB Draft Wizard is officially open. It's at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. You can do mock drafts all day long, and they are incredibly valuable. Whether or not it's this early, whether or not it's late, it helps you hone how you feel about players when you're actually looking at which person do I want to take in the same exact draft spot. You can just get a general feel for where people are going. You can try out different strategies. The simulator, totally customizable. You can go against realistic computer opponents. They take less than 10 minutes. Give it a try. fantasypros.com/draftwizard. So Nick, we are going to talk about pitchers. I do want to pick your brain very briefly before we start about this proposal that we got from the, from the league to the Players Association about potentially delaying spring training and the season by a month, making it a 154-game schedule with some doubleheaders. Now, by the time people are listening to this, the union may have rejected it already. All signs point to them rejecting it. But I do think we're in a weird age with COVID where we have to understand that this might be a shortened season. It might have to be delayed a little bit as this vaccine gets rolled out and everything like that. Let's assume that happens for a second, Nick. Like, what impact, if any, do you think that's going to have on your general outlook on either strategy or especially, pitching? What changes do you think you'd make based on that if that comes to fruition?
It's interesting. I haven't made a full decision about it yet, but I do get this idea that if it is more of a condensed season, essentially the guys that I've been pushing up because of volume maybe a little bit lower in weight because the gap between them and the guys that are going to be babied, like for example the Brewers rotation, the Milwaukee's come out and said like, hey, I think we're going to put just a blank 100 increase to all the innings. So that means like Woodruff, oh no, I can't really expect him at 190 innings anymore. Maybe 175 there. Corbin Burns maybe around 150, 160 then. So those guys that are getting like 200, like Lance Lynn, if you try to rip the ball out of his hands, like he's going to yell at you. Like he just doesn't have as much opportunity if it is a condensed season. Even though it's 154 to 162, it makes me wonder if we'll see more double headers in between, or with fewer off days, it might be tougher essentially to get that every fifth game. So essentially, the 34 start limit that we'd like to see comes down to maybe 31 or 32, and that does have some impact. But for the most part, I'm not really changing a whole lot. It does maybe Mike Soroka comes up a little bit because the injury that he had. Well, he was going to skip opening day before, but maybe he can make an April 28th opening day. So that's something to think about there. Maybe we might see more of Mike Soroka, and then that makes his value go up a little bit in ADP. But for the most part, I'm not really adjusting much based on that news.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's how I'm looking at it too. I mean, I try to underreact to things like this just because I feel like the more I try to factor it into it, the more I'm going to tinker myself out of what I would normally be able to do when I'm evaluating all players, especially pitchers. But I do agree with you that pitchers who are dealing with injuries and aren't going to come back until later in the season, Noah Syndergaard, Chris Sale, guys like that, they'd get obviously a minor bump if the season's going to be delayed by a month. But again, I'm not necessarily expecting that. And by the time you're listening to it, the union has probably rejected the proposal. But it is something that I at least wanted fantasy managers to keep in mind as we start thinking about it. But
absolutely,
let's get into it now. All right, Nick, you can start us off anywhere you want to start us off. Who's a guy, early to mid-round pitcher, who you think is being a little undervalued by the market?
Well, okay. I was really surprised to see that Kenta Maeda is the 17th starter off the board. Man, you guys got to respect Kenta Maeda. I mean, look, we were anticipating that he was going to perform well for ages with the Dodgers, and they kept saying, no, we're going to limit your innings because you have this stipulation in your contract, and we are going to have Dodgeritis, which is essentially their manipulation of the rotation so that no one really gets a 200 innings or a clear outline of when they're starting during the season. So Maeda had 153 innings in 2019, 125 in 2018, but we thought the skills were there. He had a 27% K rate at least in those two seasons for the Dodgers. Swing strike rates above 14% in both of them. And then finally he gets the opportunity in Minnesota. The Twins we're just going to let you go, even though his contract was prorated. So the same stipulations of once you throw over 36 innings, you're going to get more money. They didn't care and let him go 66 plus innings. And I think that this season, Maeda is just going to go through the entire year. There's no stoppage for him. While he has an amazing slider and changeup, stopped throwing his fastball even more, which is his weakest offering of the bunch, had a 17.2% swing strike rate. And I'm using the decimal because it makes him the third highest swing strike rate in the majors last year. And what's really crazy is if you look at 2010 and 2019 of all qualified pitchers, Maeda would have been the third highest of the decade. That's so great. I understand lower innings for qualified and all that, but you really have to grasp that Maeda showed up in a big way. 2.70 ERA, 0.75 whip, 32% K rate. I do expect him to get a little bit worse. I mean, he's not going to have a 208 BABIP, but that's a really good Twins team he's on. The AL Central is not strong. He's going to get lots of wins. He's going to go deeper into games. You're not going to dislike the innings you get from Maeda, and seeing some other players around him that have question marks, like Tyler Glasnow's going ahead of him. Glasnow, what are we going to get out of Glasnow? I don't know. 173 ERA and then a 408 in 2019. 2020 for Glasnow. Showcases the volatility you're going to have to deal with Glasnow. You're not going to get that with Maeda. You're going to get more consistent quality innings. So I really think that down at 17, it's such an amazing value play. I see 52.3 ADP. While he could outperform, actually, I think in my personal rankings, I'm going to have him above Luis Castillo, who's going 20 picks earlier. So I think Maeda is a lock. I think he's a guy that you can make as your SP1. And he's just not getting the respect he deserves, Dan.
What I loved about Maeda is that we all loved him, right? Coming into last year, we all knew that getting away from the Dodgers and going to the Twins was probably going to be a good thing for him, even though you had the move, it turned out it didn't matter because of DH, but the move from the NL to the AL. But there are a couple things. I do want to ask you about that, Nick, because when you have somebody like Maeda who really, he threw, you mentioned it, way more sliders and changeup. It was basically he cut his fastball usage by 15%, and that's a good thing. Do you think in any way his effectiveness was in part by the fact that if he does that again, right? Let's say he sticks with this thing where he cuts his fastball like that and he sticks with his better slider and his changeup. Is it possible? It was a shortened season. People didn't have video. There wasn't as much scouting. I'm sure people didn't have much time to adjust. If he maintains that pitch mix, other than normal regression, which you said you don't necessarily expect him to be exactly as good as he was last year. Do you think teams are going to catch on to that? Like, do you think any part of it was the fact that people had this report on how Maeda pitches for years and he so drastically changes it that teams weren't able to catch up? Or do you think it's just really, no, his stuff is just that effective and he'll be able to do it again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I will say 2019, I mean, it was still 37% fastball usage, 31% slider, and 24% changeup, right? Mm-hmm. And it did drop with that fastball about 12 points to about 26, but it's still sliders, changeups are the name of the game with Maeda. His overall O swing went up to 41%, which is so great. That's overall. That's not just one pitch. That's so high. It was at 35% with the Dodgers, which already was still really high as well. I don't really think it's going to change that much. The fact that the Cleveland team got rid of Lindor, you have the Royals, who are an interesting offense. I'm gonna give them that. I think they're actually slightly underrated, but that's another story. The Tigers are still there. The White Sox are going to be a little bit scary, and obviously they're going to play other teams too, not just the AL Central.
And remember, last year they did have like more NL Central as well, and also weak division, so he'll get less of that. But I don't mean to talk. I refuse to say anything that might be negative about Maeda because I'm with you completely. I definitely love him. So are you taking him over? Blake Snell or Maeda?
Yeah,
you're taking Maeda.
Blake Snell has too many question marks. Snell is when he was successful in 2018, it was because his secondary pitches. That is, his curveball and a slider were able to find the zone over 30% of the time each. And without that, which he hasn't been able to do since, Snell has to throw more fastballs in the zone, and that's why you see those home run rates go up. And we only saw it for a moment in the World Series. Like, that start, he was throwing sliders and curveballs inside the zone, and it was amazing, and that's why he was being effective, because those are such good pitches. But batters have been disciplined and able to resist them outside the zone more often and look for a heater in counts. So unless Snell makes that real big adjustment, which he hasn't been able to do consistently, I understand that there's more of a volatile journey ahead for Snell than there is Maeda, and I like the security more of Maeda.
Yep. I can't argue with it. I really can. I mean, I'm not expecting him to repeat last year's numbers, but it doesn't sound like you are either, but he doesn't need to outperform that ADP. So I am with you. So I'm a little annoyed here by my first one, okay, because I checked last night, right? I put together my list last night. I was like, all right, these are the guys I'm going to talk about. And now Jack Flaherty, and again, this is not crazy. I'm not saying Jack Flaherty would be like, well, he should be your SP5 or anything like that, but he was SP11 when I sort of started, and now he's already SP10, like legitimately just since last night. So it's already a little bit changed, but I do think I have him as my 9th guy, and it's really more about the fact that I'm taking Flaherty over a guy like Max Scherzer, for example. And this is not anything crazy. This is not anything where I looked and I found some secret sauce or anything like that, but it's a shortened season for everyone last year, right? We all knew that. Everybody had a shortened season. Lance Lynn, we mentioned, league leader in innings with 84, okay? It was especially short for Cardinals pitchers because they had that COVID outbreak. So we're talking 9 starts and 40 innings for Flaherty. So one bad start is a killer for any normal pitcher. One bad start for a guy who has 9 starts and 40 innings is an absolute just backbreaker like Flaherty had when he allowed 9 runs in a start on September 15th. So you take his 4.91 ERA, you take that start out, it's a 3.13 ERA. 121 whip, you take that start out, it's a 103. His K per 9, strikeout percentage, they were all the same. His swinging strike percentage went up, so did his whiff rate. He still has the excellent slider, right? And he walked a couple more batters, a little more home run heavy, but again, he's just 25. And so when I look at him, and again, really the guy that stood out to me was Scherzer, because you know that Scherzer right now, where he is in his career, and I still love Max Scherzer, but it's not getting any better, essentially, for Scherzer at this point, given his age, given his injury history, is obviously on the decline. And Luis Castillo, the reason why I'm really annoyed is because Luis Castillo was going ahead of him in ADP when I first looked at this. Now he's dropped behind him, but that was also the big one to me, because Luis Castillo is a very similar pitcher to me in terms of the numbers. They'll have similar ERAs, probably similar whips, maybe a worse one, similar strikeout numbers, but Castillo will have fewer wins. So Flaherty was a guy I was taking ahead of him. But now ADP is catching up to it a little bit. I'm still going to maintain I have Flaherty as a little undervalued this year.
So, okay.
By the way, you can disagree, Nick. I feel like you're holding back. You come on and disagree. You're okay.
All right. Well, first, I'm not going to allow this Scherzer hate. Okay? I'm just not going to sit here and let it settle. It's not fair. Okay, short season. It was a weird year. He had 355 BABIP, highest home run rate of his career, 14.3% homer, fly ball rate 1.34. Homer per 9 for Scherzer last year is dramatically higher than it's ever been. While he still had a near 15% overall swing strike rate, a 31% K rate, his whip is not going to be 138, and his ERA is not going to be 374. Scherzer is going to battle through the entire season. He's still going to be a rock in your rotation. And I think the security of Scherzer, and even in this bad year, again, 374 ERA for Scherzer. Yeah. While Flaherty, I got to say, I understand your argument completely. I really do. Because that one bat start is essentially a 3 ERA, and then it's like a 103 whip. I was writing this just like yesterday, and I am pretty sure that's right. Something like along those lines. Mm-hmm. But Flaherty, if you remember, entering 2020, we were wondering this time last year, well, is Flaherty's rhythm of the end of 2019 that was absurdly good, like a sub-1 ERA, is that going to stick? Because that was a man in rhythm. And I remember watching him through the entire year, right? My SP roundup right during the season, every single day, I go over every single starter on the website or on Pitcher List. So I followed all of them with Flaherty, and he was really struggling the first half, and then finally it clicked. And he had that miraculous second half that felt legitimate. But we were wondering, look, the offseason is the wall, right? It's really like it's cold and it's tall. It takes forever, and we don't know what's on the other side of it, right?
Yep.
And we didn't know if Jack Flaherty was going to be in rhythm when he returned in 2020. Well, of course, as you mentioned, I mean, if you want to talk about an out-of-rhythm season, it's the one we just had, and especially for the Cardinals who had COVID, and it just messed everything up. And across his pitches, I didn't really see the Flaherty that we saw in 2019, that second half, but again, out of rhythm. So we're asking ourselves the same question again. Are we going to see that man in rhythm through most of 2021? And because of that haze, I'm a little more on the why take the chance on Flaherty when I feel much more confident in what I'm going to get from Scherzer. I'm going to feel more confident in Kenta Maeda, believe it or not. I have him ranked higher than Flaherty.
Let me put a point on Maeda for a second. Where do you have him ranked? Where do you actually have him ranked?
My rankings come out next week.
Okay, all right. So you don't have to give it away.
But I believe it's aggressive in the teens. If you can call it the teens.
Okay.
He's not in the top 10. He's not in the top 10. I'll say that.
I'll take it. Yeah. So then where do you have Flaherty then? He's in
Flaherty
the mid-teens?
is like right behind. I have this like tier of 4 guys. Maeda, Flaherty, Gallen, Castillo, who are pretty interchangeable for me, but I think I'm going to have Maeda above Flaherty there. Just because I think the skill set is more understood. And Flaherty's, while I recognize he can go on that stretch for the entire season and have a better season than Maeda, there is more upside. And I will say that Castillo's whip is a weird thing. Yes. That he is more hittable with his fastball than I'd like him to be. And I'm the biggest Castillo stan. 2017, man, I was writing all about Castillo, and I got burned in the start of 2018 for it. But I recognize that his fastball just isn't a pitch that is going to get outs often, and he's going to have a generally higher BABIP because of it. His hit per 9 is going to be a little bit higher, which means the whip is going to be higher. But Flaherty, I want to believe it. I really do. But I have to err on the side of caution. And I don't think he also is going to have as many innings. I mean, I'll take that back. Probably similar to Scherzer, even with the injury risk of Scherzer. The Cardinals are going to be a little more careful.
I mean, and all right, a couple of things. First of all, you should disagree. You should disagree, Nick. When you feel that way, please don't. Don't tiptoe. Come out firing.
I wasn't planning on it, to be honest. It's okay.
We got this. It's just you like me so much that you're like, oh man, I can't do it to Dan. I get it. Trust me, get that all the time. But here's what I will say. Trust me when I tell you how much I love Max Scherzer. Love him beyond belief. So don't mean to speak negatively about him. Same way with Maeda. But look, at some point, it's got to be I'm willing to jump off. And jump off. He's still a top 10 guy for me. He's right behind Flaherty. I have Flaherty 9th. I have Scherzer 10th. So I'm not running away from Scherzer. But at some point, considering that we finally saw it start to kind of fall apart with the injuries, as tough as they come mentally and physically, but you saw it in 2019. It's not like 2020 is just this random kind of, we started seeing the decline towards the end of 2019 when he was fighting through injury. Now you had kind of the weird 2020 season. So for me, guy's going to be 37 this year. As much as I love him, I'm willing to have the tiebreaker be sort of the 25-year-old guy who I see as more rising as opposed to that. So that's really the tiebreaker for me. Did not mean to speak negatively about Max Scherzer. I want that on the
Do you
record.
realize that in 42% of the starts that Scherzer had, he had at least 10 strikeouts last year?
Scherzer's amazing. His strikeout rate was I get it. I know. That's the thing. He's amazing. He's absolutely amazing. He's going to be 37. He's got a million miles on his arm. I don't expect the innings. Again, how many innings do you think you're going to get from Scherzer next year?
Okay, let's say it's the full season and everything like that.
Let's do that.
I'm gonna tell you right now that the hardest thing for all of us to do in the industry, is predict innings. It is absolutely impossible. I would say all normal situation, and I kind of feel like Scherzer's one of those crusty veterans that the inning stuff is just they're immune to. When the teams are just gonna say, yeah, okay, whatever, go. We don't have to protect you for 10 years or something like that. So Scherzer, 180 or so, right? I mean, that's that's kind of it. And with Flaherty and the Cardinals, I don't think they're gonna necessarily push him to 200, 190, or so. It might be kind of the same amount of innings that we project for Scherzer, and Flaherty.
I think that's not necessarily unfair. I really think that I think, number one, the point that you brought up, which is I think almost veterans I have fewer innings concerns with, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're just like, whatever, we're not saving you for anything necessarily. We're just going to let you go out and do it. So for a guy like Scherzer, so long as he's healthy, I think 180 is probably about right. But again, the health concerns is really what does it for me, especially since you're taking the guy to probably lead your rotation, especially if it's someone like you who generally waits on pitching. If you are drafting a Max Scherzer, he is your number one. You don't want to miss on that guy. I just feel a little less confident that I wouldn't miss. I'm doing eight negatives in that sentence, but that I wouldn't miss on Scherzer because of the injury history. All right.
What's crazy really quickly, though?
Yes.
Scherzer made all 12 starts last year. And even in his injured 2019 season, he still had 27 starts and 172 innings. And then before that was just constantly over 200. Yes, so as far as the injury, he's not like it's Kershaw where we do expect, okay, there's going to be something a little bit more with him. Or this questions around Steven Strasburg. I think the innings at 180 is that sounds about right.
Yeah, I can't believe we have devolved into me basically being fade Max Scherzer all day long because I love Scherzer, I really do. And
he's at 9.
I got him at 10. That's what I'm saying. He's fine, but for me, it's Flaherty. All right, next guy, Nick. Come on, we've got too much on this. Go to your next guy.
Man, okay. All right, another one that everyone is considering as fewer innings than I think they are. I mean, why are we out on the new CC in New York, and that's Carlos Carrasco? Yep. I don't grasp it. I don't know. He's at the 25th starting pitcher off of FantasyPros ADP. That's at 77 overall. And Carlos Carrasco came back and he threw 12 starts in 68 innings last year. And this is coming from a 2019 where he was going through leukemia. Came back, had success, 291 ERA, 121 whip, 29% K rate, 15% swing strike rate. Yes, he did have a moment of turmoil as his slider and changeup weren't quite there for a moment. But that's actually kind of the story of Carrasco if you've ever rostered him in the past. Carlos Carrasco is a pitcher who has 3 or 4 starts in a given year that make you wonder. And then he's really apologetic and overcorrects in the next 5 starts and allows a total of 4 earned runs in them. And that's essentially what he did in 2020 as well. I just think Carlos Carrasco is another one of these they're going to let him go. We do have some worries about his health because, he had leukemia. He made all the starts last year. Again, I want to say that a second time. It's really important to recognize, no, this guy's back to normal. And we're treating him as if he's this massive injury and innings risk. I wouldn't say that. He had 200 innings in 2017, 192 in 2018, had leukemia in 2019, came back and pitched the full 2020. And the Mets are a really good team now. Hey, they have a much better defense and a good offense, an elite offense. Mm-hmm. He's going to perform super, super well in New York, and he's going around the massive risk of Dinelson Lamet behind Steven Strasburg, who has, I think, greater concerns. Zach Plesac, we've seen 8 starts of.
That I don't understand
Max Fried,
whatsoever.
Who's not nearly as close to the same ceiling of this. I just think there's too much disrespect for Carlos Carrasco going around.
I couldn't agree more with it. And I have him ahead of all those guys. The guys that you just pointed out were all the guys I was going to be like, yeah, why is he going behind these? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. I'm 20th. I feel like I could easily push him higher if I really wanted to. But for me, he's 20th right now. You mentioned he's 25th. The one question I have for you, Nick, and again, this is sort of something is, I don't know what we do with this very short season if we throw something out. He had a pretty uncharacteristic walk rate last year, right? He had basically been like a 2 walks per 9, sub 6% walk rate guy his whole career, like the previous 6 seasons, and then to 3.5 per 9 and 9.6% walk rate last year. Do you just throw that out as sort of like just the weirdness of a short season? Is there anything to be concerned about there, do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried. Walk rates are interesting. They can show up in like bunches or certain days, and especially in a smaller sample, walk rates I think are more just whatever, man. Like you had a 3-start stretch of 12 walks, and all right, that's gonna make your normally 8% walk rate be like a 9% or something like that. I mean, Carrasco's is normally a little bit lower than that, closer to like 6% or so. But yeah, I'm not concerned whatsoever about that.
All right. Very good. That's all I want to hear. And I am a Mets fan, so I'm very excited.
How are you now?
That.
I'm so sorry.
I'm no, don't worry about it, man.
Born and raised in Brooklyn, I wanted to be happy when I was a 5-year-old, so I like 5-year-old me.
Man, I really didn't have a choice, man. I'm Queens, New York. Like nothing I can do. Mets, Jets, Knicks. It's my entire existence.
Nothing makes me happier. I want to see the Mets succeed. I want it to be Yankees, Mets, kings of baseball. That sounds so great to me. Much to the chagrin of everyone else listening to this podcast.
I will take it. But the point you did make about their defense is you're right. Their defense is going to be better, and that is going to make a difference. But I agree. Love Carrasco there at 25th. He's a steal for me. So a guy here who I have so many shares of every single year because he is like the poster child for being undervalued, is Kyle Hendricks. He's the 27th starting pitcher off the board, 80th overall, a pretty consistent, 2.88 ERA, 1 WHIP, very, a little bit better than he usually is last year. But he is perpetually undervalued for a bunch of reasons. Number one, he does not throw hard. My response to that is the same as always. Who cares? I understand that generally speaking, command pitchers have a difficult time being successful over the long haul because velocity helps. But this guy has not had above a 3.46 ERA. He's been above a 3.46 ERA one time. He's been above a 1.19 WHIP none times. Who cares at this point how hard he throws at this point in his career? Second, he doesn't go deep into games, right? That's what everybody sort of says because Joe Madden. Well, there are a couple of things. 81 innings last year. We talked about how Lance Lynn led the league, 84 innings. He had 81, nearly 7 innings per start. Now, that could be something where you say, well, it was a short season, right? So they were going to let him and everybody else go longer. But I really think that was much more of a Joe Madden versus Dave Ross philosophy. I think they're going to let him go. So I think the innings are going to be there a little more. Third, his FIP, his xFIP, his SIERA, it's always so much worse than his ERA. I'm just waiting for the shoe to drop. Who cares? So, yes, those things are usually good and they're predictive, generally speaking, but there are certain guys who just consistently outperform those and other metrics, and Hendricks is one of those guys. We've seen him for so long at this point. I think that argument doesn't make sense to me. Fourth, the only one which I think is fair to really factor in right now is that he doesn't strike out that many batters. That is fair. I can't argue with it, but the numbers that he gives you, the consistency every single year that he gives you, I think just outweighs the fact that he's going to strike out 7.5 batters per 9. And what I love about him is he's not resting on his very lengthy track record of success, right? Like he changed his arsenal a little bit last year. He started throwing more curveballs. And again, we talked about the NL Central when we referenced it during Maeda. That's a really weak division. He's going to be able to feast on most of the teams there. So for me, Kyle Hendricks is a guy I draft every year. Nobody ever wants him. And I know why, because I've listed it. But for me, he's a guy who, it's not like I have him as the 20th starting pitcher, but I have him like 23rd for me, and I'll take him on every single team.
Dan, I'm so used to being the one that rants, and it's really nice to be able to just sit back and listen to someone rant and just nod your head along the way. That was fantastic. I remember last year talking about Kyle Hendricks on, I think, a podcast in the offseason, and I actually had a couple of commenters say, like, hey, David Ross, being the new coach, has outwardly expressed that he wants to let Kyle Hendricks loose. And I remember then shifting up Kyle Hendricks a little bit because of that. Unfortunately, because of the commenters and not anything that I did, I did better ranking Kyle Hendricks because of it. And
right.
I think that's going to stick. I think it's an excellent point about the volume from Hendricks, and I see the bats and steamer projecting 188, 193 innings. Honestly, I mean, the IPS from last year over 6 is, I mean, more than 6, like 7, I think.
Almost 7. Almost 7 per start.
Innings per start there for Kyle Hendricks. So I love that. The strikeouts are obviously a thing, and you mentioned that. And it's kind of funny. I do that. I'm actually doing a top 200 starting pitching rankings this year because I'm an absolute, as I said before, a masochist. so I have a tier here. I think it's I'm calling it like the Crusty Vets and Friend, because essentially it's Hyunjin and Ryu, Charlie Morton and Wheeler and Hendricks and Greinke and Corbin, and then also Max Fried. But Hendricks is very much in the middle of that. Like, this is a guy who's going to give you good ratios if you can sacrifice the strikeouts. The strikeouts aren't going to be so bad if you get the innings, though. It's not going to be horrific. And the fact that he increased his velocity, he throws so low, but he increased it last year.
Just a little bit.
87.4. But it was increased, the highest he's had since 2016. That's pretty cool. He's using his curveball a little bit more for swinging strikes, which is nice, not inside the zone, but getting a little bit more whiffs. That's cool, and it helps suppress the contact to keep it a 171 batting average allowed last year. Like, the whole thing works with Kyle Hendricks, and a really good point that the NL Central is terrible. So I like Hendricks. He's a very safe one. If you found yourself going a little bit more on the safer side, though, like more of volume side early, like, for example, if I'm getting Lance Lynn and like Clayton Kershaw to start it and then go, I don't know if I would go after Hendricks exactly. I might want someone that has a little bit more of a ceiling in the strikeout department. But I think he's someone you should be considering a lot. And yeah, I mean, 27 is kind of where I have him, a little slightly higher. But that's also because I have guys that are much lower that I'm pushing ahead of him. Yeah. And we'll get to those guys soon.
Well, one of the things that I think it's a great point, which is you have to, if you're going to draft Kyle Hendricks, you have to be realistic about what your team looks like. And I'll go back to Nick, our TGFBI league that we did last year. Where no, not you, my friend, just me. Where I did draft Kyle Hendricks. And again, I drafted him way later than I had him ranked. And that's another thing. You don't have to draft because of where his ADP is. Wherever you have him ranked, you know where you can wait, because he's just not a favorite really of anybody. But unlike you, I do usually like to hit pitcher a little earlier. So I had Max Scherzer, I had Brandon Woodruff, I had strikeouts that I felt comfortable with in that scenario, and innings. In that scenario, I felt completely comfortable adding in Kyle Hendricks as a pitcher. But you're right, and that's a very good point, which is if you are going to do that, you have to be realistic. Like, that, he's not suddenly going to morph into a K per inning, type of guy. That's just not what he is. You have to make sure that your team can absorb the fact that he's going to be 7.5. But as you mentioned, that big uptick in velocity that we're seeing, who knows, he might get up to 87.5, right? We never know. All right, let's get to your next guy, Nick. Who do you got?
Oh, man. So it's kind of funny. One that I didn't put on the list that I should have, I just want to say really quickly, is Zack Greinke, because, I don't know, I'm looking at it now, I'm like, how is he at 34? Man, no respect. Zack Greinke. Oh, man, he's so good. Fine. It's all right. Essentially think like Kyle Hendricks, but slightly more risk when it comes to ERA, but more strikeouts. I mean, that's really the difference, and I feel like they're interchangeable to me. Just wanted to mention that quickly. But the guy that I have above is Charlie Morton. Okay. And Charlie Morton, I mean, look, it was a weird year. I understand. The velocity was a little bit confusing. Is he throwing harder, softer, getting ramped up? We didn't know if he was going to retire or not. And I like to think that ADP is going to be adjusting. I see right now the ADP for Charlie Morton is all the way at 38 starter, 122. And I get this feeling that there is this, all the ADPs from NFBC and us doing mock drafts and stuff when we didn't know if Morton was going to retire, different than like a free agent signing. Like, no, is he actually playing at all or not? Depressed his ADP early when we had that haze. And even though that haze is gone, seeing the ADPs from before are subconsciously affecting a lot of people as they draft still. Because Charlie Morton is a really, really good pitcher. 30% strikeout rate in 2019. It was only 25%, I say only, and that's 5 ticks higher than Kyle Hendricks. But essentially his fastball velocity was a little bit weird, and the Rays are also kind of weird too. The Rays were, I think, babying him a little bit, and then he didn't, he was a little bit hurt, so he stopped. The whole back and forth with it I think made it look like he was just done, and then he came back for the playoffs and pitched well. Yep. And I look, he had 4 games of 20 innings, 2.7 ERA, 115 WHIP, 27% K rate. Like, Nick, how can you quote that kind of sample? That's pretty much like a third or half of the season we actually got in 2020. So Charlie Morton is still really, really good. He's on the Braves, which is a good thing because that's a very good offense too. Essentially, it's the Mets and Braves in the NL. I used to call it the NL Easy. It was like the best typo ever made back when the NL East was not good. Now it's kind of all right. The Phillies could be maybe something, and who knows what the Marlins and Nationals are going to do. But I think that it's a good situation for Charlie Morton. I think he's also going to be able to pitch more. They're not going to micromanage him like the Tampa Bay Rays did. And I think this is a guy who's going to give you ratios that you like for a solid amount of innings and a strikeout rate that could hit 30% once again. So I'm all in on this. I have Charlie Morton inside my top 25, and I think y'all should too.
Wow, top 25 is aggressive for me, but I agree with you that at 38, I love him as a steal. I mean, you mentioned it. The postseason is usually something I think that fantasy managers are conditioned to ignore, right?
Right.
Because it's just short. But in this year, right, it's basically a third, maybe more of your season at this point, especially with a guy like Morton, who had only 38 regular season injuries. He had the shoulder, regular season innings, he had the shoulder injury. So his velocity was down, and then, he was getting hit hard when it was down. As it started getting better, he did better. And in the postseason, that's what you said. I mean, he was basically back at like 95 miles an hour with the fastball. So assuming that you can kind of write off, I know he's old, not old for a normal human, but old for a pitcher, that, you want to say, okay, I'm a little concerned about it. But I'm totally with you at this point. There's little doubt in my mind that a healthy Charlie Morton is going to be an extremely effective pitcher. How much, Nick, when you're doing your rankings, do you factor in injury risk? Because are you going to project? I don't know if you actually do projections or not, but do you think he's going to be like 170 innings over or under?
Sure. I call them Nick's reluctant 2021 projections.
Okay.
I put it inside of my article at the end of it just because I feel like it's a good reference point for everybody to have, and it also keeps me honest too. And seeing that at times, I'm like, oh wait, cool. If I'm actually kind of thinking around these lines, and maybe I do have this guy 1 spot or 2 spots differently. With Charlie Morton, I think 170. And the thing is, 170 this year is, oh man, that's amazing.
Yes.
And like, yes, there is an injury risk here. And well, full season, honestly, if he doesn't have an injury, he can go 200 innings. He's not going to be limited by the Braves. So I am baking that in already. And again, the injury risk of Scherzer that we had in 2019, well, that was still over 170 innings. So that's kind of like what we used to expect with stuff. It was a weird case, but it's like a really bad injury if he had like 149 innings or something like that. I say 149 because that's whatever ingrained in my skull because of Chris Sale. But that's, I'm not too concerned about it. And really right around 25 or so, we start seeing so much more risk. It's just plentiful. Everybody here is exciting. You have guys like Framber Valdez and Ian Anderson going above Morton right now, 30 and 31. Framber, like, are you saying that's not risky? I mean, that's incredibly risky. What is this? I don't know what he's going to do. He's like super curveball dependent, and I don't think his sinker is as good as it has been. While Ian Anderson, I love Ian Anderson, but we've seen so little of him, and it is kind of boggling our minds how well that changeup is performing so far. I like to think it's going to stick, but it's, there's all of this stuff here. And Charlie Morton to me is look, if you give me 170 innings, which I think is a realistic projection, then I don't see how that hurts your team. And I feel a lot more comfortable going with that than these other guys that I just don't have a clearer picture of.
Yeah, and again, we sort of mentioned it. We didn't know if he was going to retire or not. I'm going to be surprised at this point if he comes back after this year. Maybe he will. But,
yeah.
All right.
This is
so
it.
I'm assuming this is it. And in which case, I mean, what are we leaving on the table at this point, right? There's no babying him. There's no worrying about next year. So he's going to pitch as much as he can. I agree with you. I have little doubt at this point, as I said, that a healthy Charlie Morton is going to be a pitcher that you set and forget and don't worry about whatsoever. So I like where your head is at. I'm going to go with somebody a might bit younger, and that's Pablo Lopez, who's 41st starting pitcher, 130th. 0.5 overall with his average draft position. I bet there's a whole swath of people out there who basically didn't pay attention to fantasy baseball last year because of the weird season, stuff like that.
Sure.
And they're like, Pablo Lopez, 5.09 ERA, 7.5 strikeouts per nine in 2019. What's happening? There were a couple of intriguing things about him though that year, right? I mean, it wasn't just those numbers were terrible, but he has the great changeup, and he'd have these ridiculous outings. Again, I'm a Mets fan, so I specifically remember watching them where he'd go up against the Mets and everybody would be like, oh, let's stream him. And he gave up 10 runs. And then he came back the next outing also against the Mets and completely shut them down, right? So it's like you've known that he has the stuff when it's on, especially with that changeup, that it's going to be good. He never issued a ton of walks, so his whip was always pretty solid. And then last year, he made some gains. He had a pretty big jump in strikeout rate, roughly a batter and a half per 9 innings. His ERA dropped to 3.61, still not walking anybody at all. He's young, so he's still getting better. And there are a couple of things when I look at Lopez, a guy I really want to buy in him that hold me back from going like all in. And they're really two things. The first is that whether it's a third pitch or a fourth pitch, depending on if we want to talk about the four-seamer and the sinker, he needs one more pitch to really go out there other than the changeup and the quote-unquote fastball. The changeup is great, but if he really wants to go, he's got either the curveball or the cutter, which he kind of introduced last year and was really, really good. So if he gets one of those two pitches that becomes a reliable pitch more often, then I think he could take a really bigger leap. And the second thing is he's just got to get a little more consistent, like that 10-run outing against the Mets 2 years ago. Like he had the 7-run outing last year against the Braves. When you watch the guy pitch, there are times where you're kind of like, oh no. Like you can tell that changeup's just not working. Something's not working. A little more consistency, develop the third pitch further. I could see him being like a real monster. So there's a lot of potential. So he's a guy who I like as undervalued.
Pablo Lopez is a friend of Pitcher List.
Okay.
I mean, I've been I'm famous for going on Sleeper in the Bus in 2019, or not Sleeper in the Bus, but on our podcast, getting I said that essentially Pablo Lopez had a 4.20 ERA floor in 2019, and that was with the understanding that his velocity gains from spring would stick through the year. But essentially, I didn't communicate that because, of course, I didn't.
A 4.10 ERA floor?
4.20. I was like, no, I think his floor is around like a 4.20 ERA because of that. And then Spora was like, Nick, no. And it became the joke of the year. And then, of course, like 5.09 ERA. But right. I'm a huge Pablo Lopez fan. We got to talk to him last year during quarantine and really understand like his approaches and what he's trying to do. And we were able to keep up with him during the season. We actually sent him a trophy because he won what I call the gallows poll, which is if you earn the most whiffs in a day as a pitcher, you get the gallows poll. And he said his goal was to win a gallows poll this year. He did against the Braves. So we sent him a trophy.
That's awesome.
Which was like the coolest thing I've ever done in my life. But yeah, talking to Pablo, I mean, he's you asked about the third pitch. It's going to be the cutter. It should be the cutter. Okay. And at least I'm trying to reinforce that. Like, please, the cutter is so good. And when he throws it inside to lefties, it's the neutralizer he kind of needs. He's really good against righties. He actually might surprise you, but the changeup, has no fear doing righty on righty crimes, which is one of my favorite things to see from any pitcher. And Pablo does it so well. It's a really good changeup, over 17% swing strike rates, high O swings as well. And having also fastballs along the inside corner to right-handers is easy breezy, beautiful cover girl for Pablo Lopez. So it's just about getting that cutter on the other side. I don't really think it's that curveball. He's kind of talked a bit about it's just not really transforming into the pitch he wants it to be, which is fine. As long as he can throw that for strike surprise ones, that's good. And we've seen some successful starts when he's able to do that at the bottom of the zone. That's fine. But it's really that cutter, and I think we're going to see that take shape more often. Now, I will agree with you very much so about the volatility. He is someone that, we saw, those 2 blow-up starts in both years, and then he came back and had success in the next one, right? Yeah. And it does rely a little too much, again, as you mentioned, on that changeup and getting those swings out of the zone on it, and there are some days it just isn't there. So it is my biggest hesitation with Pablo Lopez. I have him, I think, I regret to say it out loud, but I think I have him as the third Miami Marlin. It's a fun discussion between Sixto, Sandy, and Pablo. Yeah, I would love to draft all 3. Mm-hmm. I think if I'm going to miss out on one, it's Sixto, because I think people are just assuming that he is the Messiah, and like, well, maybe not quite yet. But essentially, I really like this pick of Pablo Lopez. I think he's, I don't know, he has, I don't want to say anything about floors anymore about Lopez, but there is a little bit more about his overall ability that does speak to not having a 130 whip, and he's not going to repeat that 509 ERA. I think he's just a better pitcher now.
Yep, I completely agree with that. So look, we have long lists, Nick, but as I expected, and I told our producer when we got into this, I was like, if you're going to put Nick on a podcast and I'm going to be in a podcast, like, there's just no way we're going to get to that number. So why don't we do this?
This is why we do it, you know? This is why we do this, just so we can talk about it with other people, right?
Well, you and I tell you what, we'll have you on again is what we'll do. But here's what we're going to do for now. We're going to cut it up to have 2 more each. Okay, so we'll do an even 10 pitchers. Okay, so I know you've got a bunch of guys you want to talk about. You can pick and choose whoever you want. Let's do 2. So start with 1. I'll do 1. Back to you. Back to me. Go ahead.
Cool. I'm going to do a pairing. I'm going to cheat the system.
Cheater.
I think they're both outside the top 200. I didn't realize this when I originally, like you said, hey, we're going to pick some guys outside the top 200. Yeah. Corey Kluber's at 200 right now, and Jameson Taillon's at 213. And I'm not saying this as a Yankee fan. I was saying this before even they were Yankees, but both of these guys need to go higher. This is my philosophy, especially for 12-teamers. Now, it does change a little bit for 15 because the uncertainty of how much they'll perform is a larger factor. The cliff at which you can take chances is later than it is in 12-teamers. In 12-teamers, though, that's where I normally talk about. I imagine you do too, Dan. Is you should be taking the chances at Corey Kluber and Taillon that late and should be higher up. My cliff, essentially how I'm structuring my top 100. Essentially, you're going to have your first 40 pitchers or so, and inside that 40, you want about 4 guys that you are confident you will not be dropping through the season.
Yep.
That you'll have them, you'll roster them. Like, those are your 4 guys, and hopefully they work. But for the most part, as long as you have 4 that you trust, you should be good. You should be solid. And you're giving yourself the opportunity then to capitalize on the other 3 to 4 guys that you have to then enter into that realm of I am not cutting them the rest of the year. So then you have 2 tiers then of risky upside and then the injury value. The injury value, I think you alluded to before with Chris Sale and Severino and Syndergaard, Soroka. These are guys that you're not going to get as much as the others, but if you do draft them, they will help your team this year. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Those are guys, when they're pitching, help you. So after that is where you get into the realm of, okay, these guys are probably not going to last after the first 3 weeks of April. I mean, look at your teams after the 14th round going in the past. How many of them stuck on your team? I'd say maybe for lucky 50% of them.
Sure.
So why wouldn't you go for Corey Kluber and Jameson Taillon? These are definitive talents. And Taillon specifically is someone, I think, coming back from Tommy John, he's in such a good position. He's talked about changing his repertoire to go from sinkers to 4 seams more often. Fast and I talked about this with him last year. And he was even saying he's relearning his mechanics. He's doing things that he's never done in the best way. His elbow suddenly doesn't hurt for the first time in a decade when he throws. He would also incorporate a slider in 2019 that made him have a super successful 2019 season. That's not going away. That was 2018. 2019 was when he had Tommy John and was hurt. And what do you know? He didn't do well for his 8 starts that Taillon had. So I think Taillon on a Yankee ball club with an amazing offense. I mean, look, even if you get 150 innings out of Taillon, those are going to be of quality. And we're talking about 150 versus 170 or 80 of Flaherty. And that's not as large of a gap as it used to be. So we got to be drafting Taillon higher. And Kluber, Kluber's dope too. So, we're forgetting how this guy was a Cy Young candidate every single year. And then all of a sudden he had a loss 2019 due to injury. And then 2020, he lost it to injury as well. And sure, you don't know how much you're going to get. But as of now, he's ready to go opening day. The Yankees just spent $10 million on him. They wouldn't have done that if they didn't feel they're going to get something of Kluber this season.
And there were a lot of suitors for Kluber.
Right.
There were a lot. Everybody was after him. So
I just think it's crazy that we're going to take a chance on Christian Javier instead. And Christian Javier, don't get me wrong, I think he'll be helpful in some degree, but he could be off your team in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And I might as well take a chance on Kluber, who has shown that he could do so much more than what Christian Javier can do. So I'm very passionate about this. This is crazy.
No, that's good. It's all passion on this program. Crazy. Let's put a number on it then. Again, I know you haven't come out sort of where you are, but these guys, you mentioned it. Kluber right now, the 60th starting pitcher being drafted in ADP at pick 200 on average. Taillon 64th and the 213th starting pitcher on average.
You're going to see them in the 40s for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I just don't see why you would not take the chance on those guys. Not to mention, I think it's the idea that you're just going to lose another season. I think is getting overblown. Right. I think you're going to get innings out of both of these guys, and you're going to want them.
Yeah. I mean, I think the point that you bring up, which is there's so much risk. There's risk with pitchers everywhere, every single year anyway. This year especially, you feel like you're going down to this, you mentioned Christian Javier. Like, how confident do we feel in any of these guys, regardless, that they're going to be able to perform well? That's especially true given the fact that, I mean, we're coming off this bizarre season right now where it's almost impossible to get a good feel as to how we're supposed to evaluate what we saw, what effect it's going to have on pitchers who are obviously going to be throwing 100 or more innings than they threw the previous year. So if you are going to take a shot when you get to that range, you're right. I don't disagree. There's nothing I could say about their performance for sure. You're right. That's the point when you want to be taking the shot on guys who we've seen do it before, right? We've seen be guys who can stick in your rotation, be excellent. So I'm not going to argue with you, Nick. I know we like it when we.
No. I'm happy. That makes me happy. I don't want to fight with anybody. I don't want this to be a boxing ring. I want this to be two fans enjoying each other.
Well, let's see about this one then. All right. I don't know how you feel. My next guy, who I think is a little undervalued here, is Frankie Montas, 46th starting pitcher. Yeah, you're good. Oh, good. Okay. So I don't even need to make 47th. I'm sorry. Again, I looked at it yesterday. Even more now. Gosh, 47th and 154th. So here's what I think about Frankie Montas. I think that fantasy managers are going to look at the guy and are just going to be like, this is like the antithesis of what I am looking for, right? You have this great 2019 season, 9-2, 263 ERA, 111 whip. Then you get the PED suspension, right? So fantasy managers in their mind always just want to be like, somebody suspended for PEDs. I'm writing off their whole performance to PEDs, even though that's usually not the case. Then he comes back last year. Terrible year, 5.60 ERA, 151 whip. His walks go way up. So there's a lot of things that fantasy managers are just going to look at and be like, I don't want that guy. I've seen, don't want him. But again, when you look at him last year, his first, the back injury that he had clearly affected him. You look at his first 4 starts, he was great. Okay. He had 23 innings, 22 strikeouts, 4 runs allowed, scratched his next start with back tightness, probably pitched through it. The entire year, his velocity was down a little bit, so that probably makes sense. And when you look at the splitter, right? So this is where it is for me. Montas threw before 2019, before his breakout year, he threw that sinker, okay? 55.4% of the time, okay? Not a great pitch. 397 WOBA against, 551 slugging percentage against. So in 2019, he basically takes 18% of those sinkers and he throws them into the split-fingered fastball, right? He cuts that, he adds the split-fingers fastballs, dominant pitch, 160 batting average against, 207 WOBA against, again, 18% of the time. So that's really kind of where it came from. His sinker was also a little better than it had been in 2018, but still not a great pitch. Then last year, his split finger just wasn't good. 600 slugging percentage against it. Batters hit 333. I think that is indicative of the fact that he just wasn't healthy the entire year, because that split finger fastball to me is a great pitch that I think he will be successful if he is healthy. So to me, I'm essentially throwing out what I saw last year, except for the first 4 starts where I was encouraged. So I'm really hoping that a healthy Montas, number one, leans back into that split finger fastball. He cut its usage a little bit last year, but hopefully he gets back to the 18%, maybe throws it more and stop throwing your sinker. I'm glad you're not throwing it 55% of the time anymore, but maybe throw it, less than you even have been, throw your fastball or something more. So I'm really hoping that even if he doesn't move away from the sinker, he can survive based on what we saw in 2019. And I'm basically saying I think 2019 was real, essentially, and I think what we saw in 2020 was mostly injury. So I'm going to have a lot of shares of Montas this year, and I'm pretty confident that he's going to get back to maybe not exactly what he was in 2019, but certainly closer than he was in 2020.
All I can think about is that Bernie Sanders meme. Once again, I am asking you to stop throwing your sinker. And that's,
what is it? Why is he still throwing it that much, Nick? Pitching. What is he doing?
Well, there are values. There are valuable assets in sinkers, right? Like they do a good job of getting you out of bad counts, where they can surprise batters with the movement. They get a ground ball when you need it, all that kind of stuff. The problem with sinkers a lot, first of all, grounders are not always a good thing. Sometimes there are when you want to not have a home run, but they are a higher BABIP pitch.
Sure.
And that's just the nature of ground balls. When we talk about hitters, when they have a higher ground ball rate, generally means their average goes up, right? Mm-hmm. So there is something to be said about sinkers. I go back and forth on Montas. I'm generally on the high end. That's why I was excited that you mentioned Montas. I was like, yes, I am. I believe in him more than I do Marco Gonzalez, for example, or Dustin May. And I do recognize that his strikeouts are going to come from a splitter, and a splitter is the most volatile pitch out there. Mm-hmm. It's something that even when he was healthy, and I very much agree, the back injury messed them up. I remember it so well. He got delayed for two games. It was actually from a Friday to a Tuesday, and it was just not the same. And then it just didn't stick around. They didn't really get back into it until the final game of the season.
That last start, right? Yeah.
But even before it, Montas only had one game above 5 strikeouts in 4, right? It was 5.395. And that's kind of the story of Montas a little bit. I do wonder if we are going to see a 25% strikeout season from Montas. I think he's kind of more like a 23 guy. Mm-hmm. And with that element involved, and obviously some question of like actually how good the ratios are going to be, it does make me hesitant because I was initially like, oh no, I'm going to push him back up to 30 or 35 or so.
Sure.
And now I'm thinking closer to early 40s along there because we just don't quite know how good that splitter is going to be and how much it's going to positively affect Montas. He does have potential to go to be a Kyle Hendricks with more strikeouts. I mean, that's really kind of what we're hoping for from Montas. The innings, I don't know. The Athletics have always been kind of weird when it comes to innings and like letting guys do things. Like on one hand, I'm thinking of the Mike Fiers types where it's like, oh, they'll just let them do whatever. But then they also have been strange with Luzardo, and then what are they doing with the puck? I don't know. And Sean and I can never find a way to get 180 innings. So,
I mean, Montas was on at least in 2019, through 16 starts, he had 96 innings. So he was throwing, But you're right. It's a good point about the A's.
That was speaking more to his 111 WHIP and the fact that he was ending at bats quickly with a sinker. Yeah, I think a little bit in 2019, or essentially, I mean, he was oddly efficient in 2019, which allowed him to go deeper into games more often. I really need to make pitches per out a bigger thing, I think, on our site. Sorry. It's just something I need to
That's okay. It's just like brainstorming right as we go. I get it.
We talk about efficiency, and it's like that is what efficiency is. And just how many pitches does it take for them to get an out?
Yep.
And I need to do more on that. Anyway, side note. I like this call, Montas. I think he's going a little bit too late right now.
And again, you're making the point. We're talking about guys who are undervalued. I have Montas 41. Okay, so he's 46 in ADP. I have him 41st, which means I'm probably going to get shares of him, and I'm higher than 152 overall. But I agree. This isn't a guy he's not 30th. As you sort of mentioned, like when you first looked at him, I like Montas. I think it's going to be a good season for him. But yeah, there's certainly risk enough for me to not be like, ooh, I'm all in. He's my 28th ranked starting pitcher or anything like that. Right. But compared to ADP, now he's 47th. Actually, I'm willing to go for him. All right, last guy or three guys if you're going to cheat the rules again.
I'm not going to cheat. Don't worry. I do like Sandy Alcantara. Don't worry. And you should be drafting him, but that's not the one I want to focus on. I want to go and focus on a guy that is 2 spots higher. And by the way, there is one of your picks I'm really hoping you choose with this.
You can tell me. I tell you what, I'll let you choose for it so you can talk about it. And I'll talk about him, but you can.
Okay, good.
There you go.
You better talk about John Means.
Okay.
Just saying. John Means.
You got it. All right, that will be my last guy. Will be John Means.
All right,
but
good.
You go ahead.
But this one is ridiculous to me, honestly. I mean, it's the same story as I've been giving, which is kind of funny. I think I've been known a little bit, if I've known of anything, is being the one that's a little too excited for the young guys coming up. And I mean, that's the fun for me of this, of watching the sport a lot and following pitching, is seeing these new talents come and then develop and become much better. I mean, look at Zack Greinke now, Luis Castillo, and Aaron Nola and Giolito. Like, these are such exciting guys. Shane Bieber putting it all together. So I find myself innately gravitating towards them in rankings. And this year, I mean, I'm the one that's like, no, you should be drafting Patrick Corbin. What's wrong with you? Why is he the 40th starting pitcher off the board at 127? Look, I get his velocity was down. We were so stressed about it. His fastball wasn't quite there, setting up the slider. But he wasn't ramped up at all. 2020 was the year of how do we get ourselves going? And entering like 2020, he was like the 10th starter off the board back in like February. You know, it was crazy. I mean, he was consistently good. He fixed himself with the Diamondbacks and Nationals. 30% strikeout rate's one of the best pitches in baseball, that slider, and his fastball just wasn't quite ready. He wasn't injured. He just wasn't quite in the groove. And that's why you have this ghastly 4.66 ERA, 157 whip. And, you know, we say this endlessly. Like, we talk to experts in the field and they say, okay, I'm taking, 2019 into account 70% and 30% 2020. And we got to really understand this is a small sample. We're not going to react strongly. So then why is Corbin down here? Like, forget about it. Move aside. Take Corbin. Be happy. You can get him as your SP4. Yeah. And you will, I mean, honestly, you can be a little aggressive and make him your 5. And, oh, man, like that, you're going to be so happy with Patrick Corbin. He's going to be the guy that made we all go, huh, right, duh. Why did we do that? You know, it's Patrick Corbin. And I think his velocity got a little bit better by the end. I'm not too concerned about it being something that all of a sudden now he's an 89 mile per hour guy. No, he's going to be back at 92.
Right.
You know, like it's fine. Don't worry about this.
I think the thing with Corbin is if you see in the spring that his velocity is kind of normal where it usually is in the spring, his ADP is going to shoot up, right? It's all it was down roughly 2.5 miles an hour last year, right? And that and you're just basically willing to say this was a weird year. He's getting ramped up, he's not ramped up and everything like that. Throw it out entirely. That's where you're coming from?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it got better as the season went on. Not exactly quite to the 91.9 that he had in 2019. 19. But Corbin, I mean, by the end of it, it was 90.6. So that's a tick lower. But I mean, full year, like, I very much believe, I would be very shocked, is what I should say, if he's still throwing only 90 miles per hour through the year.
Okay. Well, I think for me, I don't know. I have him around where he is. I have him 39, so a spot ahead, because I am worried. And if I am willing to completely write off, and you make a fair point, we are writing off so much from last year, but it's like Patrick Corbin. Okay, we're taking him from being a top 10 guy to being 40th out there. Sounds crazy. It is the velocity. And the fact is that he needs that so bad because he has such a dominant slider. That slider has to be dominant. It has to be as dominant as it could. And he throws it as much as he throws it. It's got to be dominant for him to really be one of these guys that you feel absolutely comfortable with. And I think also, I mean, you remember when the Nats gave him that deal, how much, crap they got from the industry, right? About how long it was. They're like, oh, what are you doing? And stuff like that. And then they kind of, they were so, walking the walk because of how well he had performed. And I think that people and fantasy managers too, generally speaking, have been waiting for the other shoe to drop with Corbin, basically because, almost for that real life deal where everybody was like, boy, he's not going to be good for that long. And I think they're looking for an excuse to jump off. And I think this is giving it to him. But I admit I'm a victim of that as well, because I'm also scared. Like, I really am, just because I think, like, I've been waiting for sort of a guy who's so reliant on a single dominant pitch. For me, once he shows signs of cracking, that I get a little worried, which is I guess I'm just avoiding the Nationals now, and I'm talking bad about Corbin and Scherzer, and this feels dirty because I always loved both of them. But
so I want to be clear about one thing here. If Corbin makes the full recovery, I mean, that is a top 15 guy, right?
And recovery, you mean in velocity, right?
Well, yeah, I mean in velocity, but pretty much like, okay, 180 to however many innings, honestly, because he's a 200 inning workhorse essentially.
Yep.
And like a sub 3.3 ERA and a 115, 110 whip and a strikeout rate hinting 30%, right? That's really the only thing that matters is just that he doesn't have a bad fastball again. Now that means he's top 15. I'm not putting him there. I'm not saying that's 100%. And I think, essentially we're trying to balance the probabilities of one thing or the other. I'm making the argument that 40 is too low because you have the other guys around here in the 30s that you're all risky as everything. Paddock didn't have his fastball last year. Luzardo was not a finished product last season. Dylan Bundy, I don't need to talk to you about his floor. I mean, Lance McCullers Jr. hasn't pitched 130 innings in his career inside the majors, right? I mean, he had 1 year of about, I think it was like 150 between the minors and the majors. I think it was 2015. But I mean, we're laced with guys that have serious question marks. And to me, the case of Corbin recovering that velocity, because again, 2020 sucks, and the fact that his ceiling is higher than the others, it makes a much better case for me to put my chips there than the other options in the 30s.
I think, again, the point that you're making, which is it's a pretty simple philosophy, Nick, how you look at pitching, but I really love when you explain it, because it is very much of okay, once you get past X point, everybody has warts, everybody has question marks, and these are the reasons to prefer these guys who, I've seen do it before, or there's a reason why they may have been poor, or the upside is much higher than all these other guys who are just like, okay, like, you're right when you put it that way, like, yeah, I mean, are we that comfortable right now with Dylan Bundy because of one, great season?
I wish I was. I really.
I know.
I mean, I was waiting so long for him to actually be good.
I know. But it's a great point. It is, when I'm looking at the guys who are going around him. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, I certainly will move Corbin up if at spring training he shows the velocity.
We have no idea, Dan.
Yeah,
Who knows? Who knows?
It's true. It's just educated guesses. All right, but here, let's get to my last guy, who's a guy who you're forcing me to talk about, even though I don't want to. I'm just kidding. It's John Means, who is 65th and 216th overall. So again, a little bit outside of the top 200. I hope our producer doesn't yell at me too much. So the numbers don't pop, when you look at him, a 4.53 ERA, nearly 2.5 homers per 9. But he had this weird year last year. People were getting a little bit excited about him as a sleeper. A very weird year. He had the arm fatigue that he had. He had a death in the family, so he didn't have like a normal sort of start. He gained velocity as the year went on. And that changeup that he's got, which is fantastic. It wasn't great early on in the year until later in the season when it got a lot better, which is why he had that really, really strong finish to the season over his last few starts. 1.52 ERA at 30 strikeouts over basically his last 30 innings. So he doesn't walk anyone, right? That's just his deal. 1.44 walks per 9 last year. And in 2019, his numbers just kind of, 3.60 ERA, 1.14 whip. He's not super young or anything like that, but given that he's upped his velocity. And again, it's hard for me to know what to take away, and maybe you can offer better perspective on this. The velocity gains that you see in a season. Sometimes we were like, well, Corbin, a velocity drop, who knows if he's getting up. Other guys, they might be ready to go, and they might be like, well, I'm only throwing 50 innings this year, so I'm just willing to air it out completely for the entire season, like maybe Dinelson Lamet, if that's what happened with him. But again, he did have velocity gains last year. It's a great changeup. He's got good control. There's a big potential for profit this late. There's way too much upside. For him to be going this late in drafts, which is basically free, 65th starting pitcher, 216th overall. So go ahead, sing his praises, Nick.
Oh, man. I love John Means. I really do. I mean, we were talking about his velocity increase now last year. Well, not necessarily now, but like a month into spring training. So I guess let's say this started in March into February. Means was throwing harder, and we were really excited about that. We were excited the fact that he was improving his curveball and slider, which kind of took a back seat this year. But that is something he's actually said that, that's a major part of what I think for 2021 now. That's really good. And yeah, as you mentioned, the narrative for John Means is a bit of a tragic one, and you just felt for him so much because he had a delay. He got COVID. Yep. And then so he didn't have the normal spring training and everything, had to essentially do it in the game. So he was throwing a few innings at first. And then I remember essentially he had 1 5-inning start. He was just about to get going. Then all of a sudden his father passed away. And he went on the bereavement list. So that was the second start. He had 4.2 innings. He was 4 strikeouts, 0 walks, 100 runs. Like, okay, yeah, it means we're going to start seeing him maybe get 5 to 6 innings. Then here we go. And his father passes away. I mean, how horrible is that? Not to mention, he's just about at the peak of his career. I felt so bad for him. He comes back and it's 0.2 innings, 3 innings, 4 innings, and 5.1. And then finally he gets the free reign to go 6 innings. And what does he do? Means goes 4 starts of 23.2 innings, so just under 6 IPS for those. 4 total earned runs, and ends the season with 21 strikeouts in 2 games. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's okay. This is what we were waiting for, and we finally saw it at the end. Now, the velocity, I think the velocity gains are real. He was pulling it back a little bit by the end, and it did give him a little bit better command. But I mean, we saw him at times whip it to like 96, and it was just amazing. The changeup, as you mentioned too, I love that you said this, was not as good. I think that's going to be a better pitch. I think that is going to be closer to his 2019 side, and he's essentially figuring it all out. Cool, I've got this great velocity in my fastball, but can I get that changeup now to also fit within this mold? And I think he can. It ended a little bit too much in the zone this past year, and I know that he wants to get that down and underneath a bit more often. I think that's going to happen. I think this is an ace in the making. I'm all in on John Means. I am going to be putting him, I think, in the 40s because I am going to recognize that like I can't put him at like 25 or something like that.
Right.
But I mean, every single draft, it's just I need to make sure that I roster John Means.
Yeah. All right. Well, I hope we're not in any leagues together then, because I have him like 50. I have him 53rd, and I'm like, all right, I've got him. Like, I'm way ahead of where you're like, no, man, you're like 3 rounds too late. Over
look,
there,
if I had to guess, like of the two players that are going to change in ADP from now until a week before the season starts, it's John Means and Jameson Taillon. I cannot emphasize that enough.
All right. I'm not going to argue with it. All right. Let us finish up with a very couple of listener mailbag questions because people heard you were coming on. They got excited. Super League had asked a question about Frankie Montas, which kind of already answered. So we'll go to something from Butch. Nick, what are your thoughts on Lucas Giolito in dynasty formats? What's your long-term outlook for him in terms of where to rank him?
Interesting. I think Giolito should be here to stay for a while. I think one of the knocks we've seen is that he's been under 180 innings in every season so far, but that's going to change. I mean, he's essentially a staple of that rotation for a very long time now. And the changeup sets a very good foundation. It's a really, really good changeup. I actually underrated it entering 2020 because I didn't think it could perform as it did in 2019. And Giolito's changeup was pretty much just as good, hiking a ton of swing strikes, getting a ton of zone usage inside the zone as well. He also throws it up, and high changeups are actually kind of the new craze because it works. They think it's going to be a fastball above it, and they're not going to swing it, and it comes back down. And it's really hard to adjust late on that changeup. Giolito is here to stay. Fastball's really good, throwing it up. What do you know as well? He kind of has a Nile. If you look at the, I call it the Nile of fastballs and changeups, like going down straight through the middle of the zone. And he pairs that with a slider that I think can take steps forward. We haven't quite seen it yet take full shape. He's used it as a striking pitch, which I think is a good thing. I do think that over time that will become more of a whiff opportunity of him, especially going down with it. The curveball is this like giant thing that we've been waiting so long to see proper, but he knows that he just cannot harness that beast. So it's going to be those 3 pitches for the most part, and I think Giolito is going to be just an absolute rock in any dynasty rotation for years to come.
All right, so I probably should have given you a heads up on this one, but Easy Math, nice name, asks, which Mariners pitching prospect has you most excited?
Oh,
so
that's easy, though. That's Logan Gilbert. Logan Gilbert. I really, really dig his. I watched with Trevor Huth, one of our prospect guys here. He prepared for me 23 prospects to watch with him as I watched them the first time. I'm not known as a prospect guy. I generally, once they come up, I make an assessment. But I watched Logan Gilbert during that, and I really think he's a good talent. Like he's fastball, breaking ball. I think it's a slider. I really like what he has going for him. He's the one I'd be focused on.
Okay, excellent. Last question then from a name our listeners might recognize, Too Much Tuma. He asked me a lot of times, so he was like, make sure you ask Nick. He wants to know your thoughts, generally speaking, on Casey Mize.
Ooh, okay. I imagine he's mentioning that Fangraphs article.
He was, David actually. He referenced it in his tweet. He referenced that in his tweet.
Nice. Okay.
Yes.
David Lauria is unbelievably good. I cannot express as maybe one of the most underrated guys in the industry of just how well he talks to pitchers and has these fantastic conversations about their stuff and their story. It's really, really great. He had one of Casey Mize, and Mize is interesting. I think for fantasy purposes, 12-teamers, you just need not apply. For Dynasty, it's a little more interesting. Generally, Mize has a storied injury history, which isn't good. I also really don't like the fact that with his mechanics, he kind of does what I call the squat, which is if you think of Chris Stavinsky, where he's leaning down towards the left, he like sticks out his butt a bit, and it doesn't stay completely straight. It kind of exposes his entire front side. Mize does this a good amount, and I don't really think that's a good thing for consistency. It's a little awkward. But regardless of that, Mize's slider / cutter, I think you actually mentioned in that article that he has to think it's a cutter. I really liked it last year because it was able to nip the top of the zone effectively, jam guys. It was like the glory pitch for his debut. It was amazing, the golden one, and it kind of disappears as the season went on. And then his splitter was inconsistent. What do you know? Again, most volatile pitch in baseball. I don't think his fastball is all that great, and that kind of makes for a guy that I'm crossing my fingers one day can get like a 25% strikeout rate. But honestly, it's going to be more of you're hoping for a Kyle Hendricks type, and I think it's too volatile right now to expect that to happen for Mize. So I would honestly, I'm on the outs of Casey Mize. And when it comes to pitching prospects in general in Detroit, I think Matt Manning is the one that I've sided with the most.
Okay, good. Well, now Tuma Tuma, who's a guy who I love, Brendan Tuma, will stop bothering me so much because finally I've gotten you the expert opinion on Casey Mize. From Nick, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed talking to you. Remind everybody, what's dropping. You said you're dropping the list.
Oh, man.
Your top 200?
So, first of all, this was awesome. Yeah, we are. So every year, Pitcher List does a massive launch. Ours is coming in early February, and look out for that. We are changing how we do things in the best way. We have so much content, everything you need for fantasy, and more than that, just baseball content from amazing things we love about baseball and talking about the CBA and of course all the rankings, everything. It's here at Pitcher List. You want to be here. I got my first pitch podcast in the morning through the season, my SP Roundup lists through the week. I mean, it's just, you should be here. Come hang out with us. And we have a Discord as well. So if you get PL Plus and support us, you get to hang out with the staff and get all your questions answered, as well as many other things that I'm going to be revealing very shortly. So lots to come, and we hope that, we hope you see you around.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, just being frank, if you enjoy baseball, you should be going to Pitcher List often. They've got great stuff over there. I'm not just saying it because Nick graced us with his presence over here. No,
much, Dan.
It's wonderful, honestly. And we were talking about this actually very briefly, Nick. We can pull the curtain back a bit before we started recording, of how every single person who I've been there, you get to know people in the industry just generally, whether you're in the same leagues with them randomly or you just happen to come across them on Twitter.
Sure.
To a person, every single person who I've ever interacted with associated with Pitcher List is great.
Oh, man.
And knowledgeable and awesome.
I cannot speak enough praises for the staff. I don't know how I get to work with all these great people. But I feel so lucky. I mean, really, we have 170 staffers, and I don't know how this happened over 7 years that I've been doing this, but they're amazing. I mean, they just make this such a great time, and they do it for you. So they're fantastic.
Well, you built a great thing over there, so I look forward to seeing where it continues to go. In the meantime, we're going to be back later this week talking to somebody else who you might know from Pitcher List, Alex Fast, who I really look forward to talking to again after we caught up last year. We'll be talking about some later rounds starting, so make sure you tune into that. In the meantime, thanks so much for listening. Remember, go to pitcherlist.com, check out all the great stuff they've got going over there, and I will talk to you again later in the week. Looking for useful content, fantasy-relevant information, and the data that can help your team win? Make sure to subscribe to our FantasyPros YouTube channel. And while you're at it, don't forget to follow us over on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at FantasyPros so you get all the information you need to dominate your leagues all season long.